Welcome back, everyone. Craig and Jonah here today. So we have another interview. We've had quite a few recently, but we have Kevin Nontradical. Um,
Patent
and
pending.
really, yeah, right, TM. Really looking forward to this one. I found you probably about a month ago. We have some overlap in our audience a little bit, and so I started looking at your stuff, and I think we have a lot of common ground to talk about. So with that, Kevin, since my audience may not know you, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Yeah, thanks so much for having me on the show. Um, so I am who am I? I'm truthfully I'm nobody. So I was born into a family that was, I guess, kind of like a big family in the little church that I grew up in.
Mhm.
So my grandparents founded the FSSP chapel that I grew up in. In case your audience might not know what the FSSP is, it's one of the trad organizations that split off from the SSPX. Um, the chapel that I grew up attending was kind of weird because it's older than the FSSP. So it actually during the split there was a vote where the whole church had to put a vote on, and the FSSP beat the SSPX out by just a hair.
Hmm.
So there was some kind of contention there that all happened. I guess just before I was born, I guess is when that happened, like the early '90s. I'm a mid '90s baby, and so that's kind of the environment I was born into. FSSP, but when I tell people how I grew up, sometimes they say it sounds more SSPX. Maybe that's why. Anyway, um, because my grandparents helped to found the church, there was definitely like a lot of kind of, I guess, just family pressure to be the ideal trad family, I guess. And it wasn't just me. We had cousins who lived a mile down the road from us too. And between the two families, there was only 11 of us, so not huge actually, but um, there was always expectation that some of us would go become priests, like at least one of us. My confirmation name is John Vianney because when I was getting confirmed, I thought I wanted to be a priest. Uh, I guess shortly after that, though, I found out what girls were, and the whole priest thing kind of
Hmm.
went out the window.
Yeah,
Yeah.
been there,
Uh,
done that.
yep. And actually, I have a brother who wound up going to the seminary, the FSSP seminary in Nebraska. He discerned out, but I have a cousin who's there, and he has been there for 5 years or something like that. So he's almost definitely going to be a priest.
Okay.
Um, so one of us made it. It wasn't me, but one of us made it.
Took the
And
pressure off you a little bit.
well, yeah, he went to the seminary after I had already left the.
Okay. All
So
right.
the pressure was kind of already off, I guess,
Yeah.
before that. But
Right.
anyway, um, so I was a good I was a good little trad for most of my life, up until college, I guess. I never really questioned anything, I guess. It was kind of just the air that I breathed. You don't really stop to question the broader culture, I guess. And my broader culture was traditionalism. I went to mass 6 days a week. I went to confession once a week. We were at that chapel, like that was almost like my second home. I went to school in the basement of that church at this like little FSSP. You can almost think about it like a homeschooling co-op rather than like an actual school, I guess.
Mhm.
But instead of I wasn't homeschooled because my mom didn't teach me. My friends' moms taught me, I guess. So,
Mhm.
but that it was my whole life, and I was, I was a good little trad, I guess, for a long time. Um, and then what did it for me was, I guess, similar concerns to what you guys talk about on this show a lot, I guess, is sexual ethics. So, for me, I guess kind of like an important part of my upbringing is that we didn't really talk about gay people. Um, I distinctly remember learning that Freddie Mercury, the lead singer of Queen, was gay. I had no idea. I listened to Queen growing up, and I didn't know. I didn't even know what like being gay was until I was probably like 13 or 14, if I'm being honest.
Mhm.
Um, and so because I grew up like that, I lacked any kind of moral intuition about the rightness or wrongness of being gay. Sure, I had the moral intuition that any kind of marital stuff pre-marriage was wrong, and I think
Mhm.
that I had that intuition because of how I grew up.
Mhm.
But I didn't have that intuition about like if two men want to get married,
Mhm.
then it seems like it should be kosher to me.
Mhm.
That was the intuition that I had. Now, obviously, I knew that was wrong. I knew that my intuition was wrong. But I had this intuition, right? So I better start doing my homework, right? I better be a good trad. So I did. I started reading, and I realized that I just didn't really buy Catholic sexual ethics. Now, I'm condensing a whole long period here. So by this point, I'm probably like 21 or 22 years old. And I'm reading about, I'm reading people like Phaser, and I'm reading the Summa, and I'm realizing that I just don't think that morality is teleological in nature. And if
Why
that's
don't
the
you tell
case,
us say what
oh,
teleology is?
yeah, that's a good one. So Aristotle wrote in his book called Physics, and Aristotle, to be clear, Aristotle thought that he was doing science.
Mhm.
So there are four reasons why anything happens. There are four causes. And the fourth and final cause is the telos. The plural of that word is teloi, and it just means end or cause or purpose. Why does anything happen? Well, one of the reasons why it happens is because that's the end or the purpose of that thing, according to Aristotle. Aquinas takes that and runs with it. Largely falls out of favor in the philosophical landscape by the time of the Enlightenment, and it's virtually absent from the philosophical landscape today, besides people like Phaser and Oderberg and people like that. But I realized that I was kind of with the majority of other philosophers, and I wasn't on the side of Phaser and Oderberg and Aquinas and Aristotle. Which is probably not surprising if you know the education that I was receiving at the same time. I wound up going to engineering school. I wound up getting my bachelor's degree in chemical engineering. So engineering is very practical. It is very, it's very STEM. It's very empirical. Teleology is none of those things. It's not empirical. Despite how Aristotle wrote about it in physics, people like Phaser and Oderberg will admit that there's nothing like empirical about teleology. And I found that to be like kind of a big deal. I thought, well, if it's not empirical, like, why should I think that morality is teleological in nature? I realized I didn't. I didn't think morality was teleological in nature. And so that's not only going to kind of undermine, whether or not marriage can be between a man and a woman, but it also is going to undermine things like, well, I think that means that not all acts between married people have to be procreative. I think it's okay for married people to have marital relations without every single last one of them being procreative. And because that flew in the face of everything that I was raised, like it's kind of like, I guess I realized that not everything that I grew up hearing was true. And when I realized that that was the case, that kind of set me off on this whole big adventure, one that's still ongoing, I like to think, where I, I don't call myself Catholic anymore. And I do that more because people get mad at me when I do. You two are braver than I am. But I'm still doing this exploring. I'm doing it on YouTube now. I have a small YouTube channel called Kevin Nontraditional, where I kind of just,
Small. Yeah, a lot bigger than ours.
well, you know, compared to, Matt Fradd and all that,
Yeah.
so, but, yeah, so that's me. That's a little bit about me.
So, you did this whole struggle with teleology predate your sort of departure from traditional Catholicism, or was it which came
Yeah.
first? Okay.
Yeah. So I was never Catholic, but not trad. I was trad. I realized that I had these questions about teleology. I spent a few years being like a trad in a weird standing. And I guess in college, I went to a couple crew meetings. And if you don't know what crew is, it's Campus Crusade for Christ. It's a very non-Catholic Protestant, like Christian college club. And so there might have been 6 months or something where I considered myself like merely Christian, a la C.S. Lewis or something like that. But when I say 6 months, I mean 6 months max. Like, it was a short period of time. It kind of crumbled pretty quickly for me, I think. I went from being like a trad in good standing to being agnostic, like fairly quickly, I guess, within a span of a few years.
How long has it been since you were at a traditional Latin mass then?
So I was at one in October.
So like for a like wedding or some other family thing, or
Funeral,
just
yeah.
funeral?
Yep.
Okay.
Oh shoot, hold on. That was actually an October ago. So it's actually, it wasn't like a few months ago. It was like
Okay.
15 months. It was 15 months ago or whatever. Yeah.
How'd that feel?
Weird.
Yeah.
Really weird. Honestly, it wouldn't have felt weird if things didn't happen with my family the way that they did. Um,
Yeah.
like I hold no ill will towards Latin as a language. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Incense, I do not find incense to be offensive, you
Right.
know. Um, but it's just that I associate all that with how I was raised.
Hmm.
And you know, I don't think I'll ever be able to untangle the way that I was raised from my kind of just general feelings about the Latin mass. So it was weird. It was very weird.
So as an agnostic, do you still pray?
Yeah, actually, I do. And you'll laugh at me, but I've actually been praying from the book of Moroni, Moroni book 10. It's a book from the LDS Church, the Mormons. Because I've had Mormon missionaries showing up at my house once a week for the past 2 months, and they
You must be a
are.
fascinating creature to them.
I think they're getting tired of me, honestly. But
Asking too many questions, huh?
yeah, I brought out Hume last week and they kind of got offended.
Okay.
But uh in Moroni 10, there's this promise that like if you read this book with like an open heart, then like the Holy Spirit will move you to let you know that like the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is the one true church, and that Joseph Smith was a true prophet of God. And so I've been like reading Moroni 10 like every other day for the past like 2 months or something. I can't claim to have been moved by the Holy Spirit yet to accept that the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is the one true church. But I haven't given up yet either. I'm not exactly optimistic. But that is, you know, I do like to think that I test the waters.
So do you feel like you're searching for the truth or searching for God, or like why read the book of Moroni, I guess?
Yeah, no, I definitely still feel like I'm searching for truth for sure. Um, there's an expression like all truth is God's truth. And if we take that expression, you know, kind of literally, then I guess I am searching for God, right?
Mhm.
Like there might not be a difference between searching for truth and searching for God. And if there is, okay, very well. I'm still at least searching for truth. Um, I definitely don't have all the answers. In fact, I think I have a lot fewer answers than a lot of other people. Um, I have a lot more questions though, so I've got that going for me. um, but yeah, I mean that's I do pray because I am still kind of looking for answers.
Yeah, because I think there's a lot of people that I know that I guess call themselves agnostic usually are just kind of sitting there really, they're kind of like post-Christian, but they're not really doing anything to actively resolve their ambiguity in their mind. But it sounds like you're sort of still on the hunt.
I like to think that I'll always be on the hunt.
Mhm,
Like these are the biggest questions that we can ever ask ourselves, right?
mhm,
And so if I ever get to the point where I'm apathetic, that you know,
mm.
and maybe I will one day. I can't, you know, I can't see the future. Um, but I'll be upset with myself if I ever become apathetic. Um,
Yeah.
yeah,
Well, you got a podcast. I mean, that makes just the whole concept of your podcast is very interesting. We sort of still have a sort of stake in all this, trying to figure out this mess that we're dealing with. Your sort of continued involvement in this space is fascinating to me.
I think a few people find it kind of, and I think your word choice there, fascinating, was very generous. Um, I find that I annoy a lot of people um, because they're almost like, why are you in my space? Like, this is Catholic YouTube. Get out of here. Why are you in my YouTube algorithm? And I just say, I'm sorry. Like, you know, I don't control the YouTube algorithm. If you don't want, you know, don't. And let me tell your audience, do not watch me if you don't want to. Like, I'm just some kid on YouTube, like pontificating. Um, if you're not asking questions, like if you don't want to ask any questions, if you're kind of content, like to not really ask any questions, don't watch my channel, and that's fine.
Yeah.
Like I'm honest to God, I'm not like offended in the slightest.
Well, it's funny because I think on one of your videos, I think I don't know who you were talking to. Maybe it was Pelega. One of you made the comment that you're doing this because those that should be doing this aren't doing it. Let's say that's
Yeah,
the and we sort of feel that way too. Like we're like someone should be like dealing with this crap. But if no one else is going to do it, we're going to do it because
that
it's just too important not to.
yeah, and you know one of those. So I don't recall if this is the exact time that you're referencing, but there was one time that somebody asked me like, hey, look, you don't call yourself Catholic anymore, right?
Mhm.
Right. Then why have you done like 12 videos on Marian apparitions?
Mhm.
Fair question. It's a fair question.
Mhm.
Why do I care so much?
Mhm.
I mean, truthfully, I shouldn't have to.
Mhm.
But like the misconceptions about Marian apparitions are so abundant, and Matt Frad sure as hell isn't going to do it. So I guess if nobody else will, I guess I'll do it. And I'll hang up the, if Matt Frad comes out with any kind of broadly skeptical videos about Fatima, I'll hang up my cape. I'll retire the YouTube channel. But they haven't, and so I guess I'm doing it.
All right, I have to ask, what kind of misconceptions are there about Marian apparitions?
Okay, well, I think a lot of people here, so a lot of people will watch the 1954 The Miracle of the Sun, the film, or they'll watch like the 1948 The Song of Bernadette or whatever, and they'll just kind of uncritically think like, yeah, that is exactly what happened.
Mhm.
And then you actually go read the source documentation. That is not at all what happened. So just like for instance, for Fatima, the children were known for seeing things before Fatima. Like they claimed that angels had been visiting them since they were like 4 years old and stuff like that, which doesn't mean it's not true. It's just, that's something that you should probably know. The prophecies were not shared until after they came true, except for the third prophecy. So the first one was that Francisco and Jacinta would die. That prophecy wasn't shared until after that they had both died. The next one was about the end of World War I and the start of World War II. This one's kind of interesting because if you read the source documentation, Lucia actually at one point says that the war will end soon. And that was prior to the October apparition. But then in the October apparition, she tells everybody that Our Lady said that the war ends today. Our soldiers are like on their way home now. And there's actually a recorded conversation between like the local parish priest and like the 14-year-old Lucia, where the priest says, are you sure that Our Lady said today? Because it was in the newspaper. Fighting is still ongoing. And Lucia says, look, man, Our Lady said today. I don't know what to tell you. And of course, the war went on for another year. So did it end soon? I mean, yeah, maybe a year is soon, but it definitely didn't end on October 17th, 1917. So, or yeah, whatever. There's other things too. And it's funny, the only secret, like the only prophecy that was revealed before the fact was the one about the assassination attempt on Pope St. John Paul II, which if you actually read it, it's
vague.
Very vague. Like, if you close one eye and then if you close the other, maybe it looks like an assassination attempt. But in the actual apparition, like what happens is the Pope gets killed, along with a whole slew of other like martyrs while they're on a pilgrimage up a mountain.
I have often thought about Fatima too, just what the children saw and whether or not it, because people get upset if you question Fatima, especially, I would say. But especially the vision of hell, like it's terrifying. And when they talk about how most people went to hell because of sins of the flesh, what does that mean exactly? I think is what terrifies me the most about that.
Frankly, if you asked like the adults from my chapel, it means whatever you need it to mean in the moment to make your kids behave, because that was absolutely used as something like a scare tactic for us kids, for sure.
It's funny because every time that I sort of get out of my paranoid state of mind, that Jonah will always bring up
yesterday.
Will you just stop?
I just retweeted a Fatima thing yesterday.
I'm gonna have to block him. Yeah.
But it is kind of terrifying to think about, and you don't know if it's true or not. And I mean, and I have went and looked for reasons why Marian apparitions aren't true. I'm just interested in seeing both sides of the story. Not that I don't believe them or believe that Mary appears like that, but it's interesting to read or just know the truth. So I think we're on the same page there.
Yeah, and I mean, like, regardless of whether or not like you fall on the same side, like let's say that like you learn all the information that I present in these videos, and you still think that every single apparition that I am broadly skeptical of, you still think that they're real apparitions, that's fantastic. I frankly don't care if anybody isn't convinced by my arguments that therefore the apparition didn't happen. That is not at all my goal. My goal, though, is to give you all the information so that you can make a more informed, so that your beliefs are just better informed. That's all.
Here's the fundamental problem, is that, the only people that are really, by and large, are going to come out and offer the type of critique that you offer, at least that I've seen, are quote unquote non-Catholics. I mean, we get nervous about talking about 2352 of the Catechism on masturbation and where it's sort of the culpability is limited or not, and it's right in the Catechism. Like, we're just, you get beyond that and you start just questioning, not even questioning, but just asking questions about some of these things we just have always been taught are true, whether it's the Marian apparitions or some of the sexual ethics and things like that. People get very, very uncomfortable, and what I always say, the polite Catholic media just stays away from. They just get up and they just repeat.
Yes.
Well, this is what the ruling is. So find a way to conform your mind and your will to what the church says.
Yeah, I don't want to. So I'm on a Catholic podcast. So let me make sure that I phrase this correctly. In my very particular upbringing, I will not speak for all Catholic upbringings. I won't even speak for all FSSP trads. Just in my particular upbringing, there was very much so an attitude of, yeah, go ahead, ask any kind of questions. We love questions as long as you accept the answer and get back in line.
Yeah.
That was the attitude.
Yeah. No, I think that's right. And I'm a former FSSP too. I kind of broke my parents' heart when I went into the seminary for a diocese at the diocesan level and not the St. Peter. But my trajectory, at least so far, is a little different than yours. So,
so I just have to ask,
Yeah.
which of the is there a Marian apparition that you feel is the most genuine or most convincing?
Oh man, yeah. I mean, so that's
because I feel like I would trust your answer. Like, obviously, you're looking at it from both sides. I'm just purely interested.
Yeah, so there are going to be Marian apparitions that are just way humbler in scope than others, for instance. So staying on Fatima, let me kind of tell you that Fatima is the least humble of all the apparitions, probably, right? According to some people, literally everybody in a 600 square mile radius saw the sun dance. That's not true. We have first-person accounts written by people who were present at the Cova de Iria, and they didn't see the Sundance. We have secondhand accounts of people who were at the Cova. We have firsthand accounts of people who were on their way to the Cova, but within the 600 square mile radius in which they should have seen it, and they didn't. Does that make Fatima better or worse? It's less humble. So in some sense, the maximum version of Fatima, I think I'm super, super skeptical of the maximalist case for Fatima. But do I think that something happened at the Cova de Iria on that day in 1917? Yeah, I do. I mean, way too many people wrote about seeing something. And yeah, people spoke about it differently. Lucia described it as just the sun looks like the moon. That's it. That's all she said. That's not that impressive. But then other people were saying that they saw the sun turning different colors, reds and greens and purples. Some people said that they saw the sun like zigzagging back and forth. Some people said that they saw the sun diving towards the earth. It's the amount of people who said that they saw something convinces me that some kind of solar event happened in October in Fatima in 1917. However, I think that the very humble cases might have like a better chance of being entirely true, if that makes sense. So you can think about like Our Lady of Akita, for instance. Like nobody saw Our Lady except for one nun. And all that kind of happened was like a statue wept some blood. And that's it. So like it's a lot more humble. So it's a difficult question to answer, and that was a very long-winded response.
Well, And I know you've got some videos on those, and I'll without having you go through all it again, we'll link to some of those below, because I did see your one on Lourdes. I thought
Okay.
made me think a little bit. But we can't. We got to start talking about the good juicy stuff here. So
Let's do it.
all right. So can I, and let me ask you this, and if you don't want to answer it, fine, but I know you're married. What's your spouse's situation? Is she Catholic? Did you get married in the church at all? Must not have.
We did.
Okay.
So yeah, I glossed over this whole part of my story because I don't love telling it.
Yeah.
We and I want to say this, I guess briefly and respectfully, but so I told my family I didn't believe anymore. I told them, by the way, I'm accepting a job offer that's moving me 700 miles across the country. And hey, my girlfriend at the time is coming with me because I don't think it's wrong to live with somebody before you're married. And I'll save you all of the details, but we wound up essentially having a 3-month engagement. We got married in the FSSP church that my grandparents founded. There were less than 10 people present in the chapel at the time that we got married. We didn't even have a mass. It was literally just the sacrament of matrimony. When the ceremony wrapped up, we got into the car and we drove 700 miles away. And yeah, it put a big strain on our family, and it was tough. It was very tough. And, I can talk more about that, I guess, if you guys want. But my wife was born to a Italian American family. And so she grew up like wearing like Padre Pio medals and stuff like that. But it was far more of a cultural thing for her. And her family's church was a Novus Ordo church, but they weren't even like a go every Sunday kind of family. And so she was Catholic, but she was nothing like the kind of Catholic that I was. But we did get married in a trad church.
Yeah, I was just curious because, of course, these kinds of questions when you're married affect both of you, and if one is super traditional and the other one's not, obviously that can create some conflict. So so this was kind of, so the sexual ethics thing, this began before you got married then, right? You were starting to have these questions before you got married, and then
yeah.
Okay.
In fact, they kind of like sprang up and they wreaked their havoc. And then I was kind of like as settled as I am now that like the church is just incorrect on these matters. That all happened before I got married. In fact, it was because of that I told my parents, like, hey, I don't believe anymore. And then so in a way that's the reason I got married in the first place, is because I made the tactical mistake of telling my parents that I didn't believe anymore. I really should have just not told them and kind of just
it was maybe more of a favor to your parents than anything else, getting married then.
100%. We only got married because we thought that it would kind of preserve some kind of relationship with my family. It didn't. And we always say we got my wife and I, we got extremely lucky that we are just as madly in love with each other today as we were when we first started dating 10 years ago, over 10 years ago now. We got married 5 years ago. But like that could have gone so wrong. I mean, a shotgun wedding with a 3-month engagement to appease my family? What the hell was I thinking? What was I thinking? And I wasn't thinking clearly at the time. I was thinking like, how do I make everybody happy? How do I preserve, and how do I not bring scandal onto my family's name and stuff like that? That's what I was thinking. And like in hindsight, I should not have worried about any of that. The scandal that this would have brought to my family's name would have not been my problem. And we shouldn't have gotten married when we were only 22 years old, but we did. And we got lucky.
The one thing that I've observed, having been in the traditional circle and still have it, and I know even, so I left the traditional Catholic, became a seminarian for the diocesan, which my parents eventually got over and accepted that. And then when I left and I was going to start dating this girl, that was just too much for them. But then of course their next their next question is, how soon are you going to get married? Because God forbid it goes on too long, you're going to fall in bed with each other, and that's the worst thing. Like, getting married quickly is far better than falling into fornication. I mean, that's just the traditionalist mindset.
Yeah.
And that, I mean, that just boggles my mind. I mean, this is not that I don't care about that stuff, but like, this is too big of a commitment. I mean, to just rush into things, even if it's for the right person, just not being prepared, I think is too just glossed over because we're just so afraid. Like, again, the Fatima stuff, we're so scared of the sins of the flesh that we just got to hurry up and get married, because marriage somehow protects you from all that stuff.
It doesn't fix everything.
Yeah.
For the sins of the flesh, but
I broadly think that people like Matt Fradd are harmless, except for when, and he says this too often, he'll just say something like a blanket statement like, go get married young and have lots of babies. And I'm like, okay,
Yeah.
I got married young.
Yeah.
It was a massive mistake. Like, and again, I got lucky. My wife and I are still madly in love. That could have gone so wrong for us. And we could have been divorced when we were 23 years old. Like, that could have happened easily. And it does happen. It happens every day. And you see it with like military guys a lot. Like, military guys will like rush into marriages and they get divorced. Not to speak poorly of you know, our friends in the military, but
no, I see it.
But it happens. And I think when Matt Fradd just casually says like, oh yeah, get married young and have tons of babies, like flippantly almost, like maybe we shouldn't speak so flippantly about one of the biggest decisions that you will ever make in your entire life, if not the biggest decision.
it's fair.
As a father of 9, I've never been more concerned about the idea of everyone having large families. I mean, again, I consider myself fortunate that my wife and I have as good a marriage as we do, and our family is as good as it is, because I mean, I not that we're better than anyone else, but we've had some opportunities that have sustained us and allowed us to make this work. There's a lot of people that I think are just not prepared for this based on either their background or their circumstances in life. Just can't be having like 9 kids or whatever the case may be. I mean, that is just flippantly say, yeah, that's what everyone should be doing. I just find that very, very concerning.
Me too. When my wife and I got married, she had not yet finished her bachelor's degree. Today, she has her master's degree and she is a board certified behavior analyst. The idea that she would be able to finish her bachelor's, start and finish her master's, get credentialed, and then get the amazing job that she has today while being pregnant like once every 11 months.
Yeah.
There's no way that we could have done that. And I know that the trads listening to this will say, exactly.
Yeah.
That's by design. Women aren't supposed to work. And okay. That's all I have to say to that is okay.
Well, I mean, I'm not going to give too much about my personal information, but when I went to graduate school, it was a very, very Catholic institution with a lot of scholarships, and there was actually a lot of controversy that they were giving scholarships to women with the idea that we're just giving these scholarships to these women that are just going to go get married, start having babies, and not use it anyway. I mean, that was it was just said out loud, and some of that more or less turned out to be true. I mean, that's kind of what you do as Catholics, but that's yeah, it's a big problem. I mean, it is a big problem for traditionalist or very conservative Catholics, I think.
Yeah, I mean, at my chapel, so I told you that I went to school in the basement of the church my grandparents founded. They had a high school associated with the school. I went to a public high school because my dad's an engineer, so he knew that it was important for me to actually take sciences. And they didn't really offer sciences, like not real science in the basement school. However, the people who did go to the basement school for high school, they only went to Christendom College. That's the only college that they went to.
Yeah.
Maybe some of them went to Franciscan, maybe, but all of the ones that I
Franciscan's a little too liberal.
I think so. I think
Yeah.
a little too speaking in tongues and stuff.
Yeah. Yeah.
But and we would make jokes like somewhat frequently about women going to Christendom to get their MRS degree.
Yep.
It's just ring by spring, you go get your MRS degree. That's all you need. That's why you're there.
Yep.
Kind of gross.
Yeah. I don't know. And of course there's this overwhelming movement to go. So many people are going back to traditionalism, and adopting that. And I don't know. I mean, like I said, I once was part of that. It seemed like the answer to the ills that the world and the church faced, but I don't know. I don't think that's leading us in a good direction. But
my hot take for the day is that like the overwhelming tide of return to tradition that we see online is a facade. And if these people really were like returning to tradition, they would just be off the internet. Because like the hardcore people that I grew up with didn't have Twitter accounts,
right.
And so I think a lot of the online thing is largely a facade. It's LARPing. And that's not to say that the traditionalist movement isn't growing, because it is. And I'm very worried that there's going to be a whole new generation of Kevins in 10, 20 years from now or whatever. The kids who are growing up the way that I grew up, they might turn out like me, and I sure hope they don't.
So what do you and move on here, but I don't remember. It doesn't seem to me that there's a lot of traditionalists that go AWOL, from what I can tell, at least at a much lower rate than, let's say, more conventional Novus Ordo churches, where I would say it's very common for the kids never to really just leave the church. But in traditional circles, it seemed to me like there was a high retention rate. Is that what's your sense of that? Like, are you the only one in your family, for example, that is in your position?
So I'm not the only person in my family who doesn't really believe anymore.
Okay.
I can say that. But I am the only person who's open about it. I suspect that there are a lot of people like that in the traditionalist movement who don't really believe, but hey, this is just my culture, so I show up and go.
Yeah.
On top of that, though, there are a decent number of people who leave. And it surprises people when I say this. And maybe my upbringing was not indicative of like the trad movement. But when I think about like my classmates in the basement school, I would say that half of us no longer practice.
At all.
At all.
Not just trads, you're just not practicing at all.
Yeah, I'd say about half, I would say. Which maybe half is actually better than Novus Ordo retention rates. I don't really know. I can't speak to Novus Ordo retention rates.
Maybe.
Yeah.
It could be. It could be. But yeah, I would say now my family, I'm the only openly out person. And, among the 11 of us in my generation, between my cousins and I, there's I would say that less than half are even like not practicing at all. So I'm not going to like name names on here because, but I have family members who I know don't really believe, but even among the 11 of us, I think that it's probably 3 or 4 of us out of the 11. So that's a 75% retention rate, I guess, in my family. And I think that's just because my family was the familial pressure to stay trad, I think, is just really strong in my family. We had this very like, what will grandma and grandpa do if you that was kind of the glue that, it was pretty screwed up.
So does the departure tend to be, like you said, just to be non-practicing at all, as opposed to, well, I'm not trad anymore, but I'm going to go be just a more of a good conservative Novus Ordo Catholic. That doesn't seem to be the normal stepping stone.
In my experience, ex-trads become agnostic or atheist because we hear from the pulpit on a weekly basis how the Novus Ordo is BS. The Novus Ordo is nonsense. So if you already had the best of the best, right? Like the cream of the crop is the traditional Latin Mass.
Mm-hmm.
So are you going to go from the cream of the crop to the second best option? No,
Right.
you're probably just going to be like, well, I've already seen the best that the church has to offer, so I'm out. That is kind of, now that's just my experience. I don't have data to back this up. I would love to see more data about the traditionalist movement, but it's just such a small movement that there's like Pew Research like doesn't know about the traditionalist movement. I'm sure they know about it, but it's not big enough to show up in these polls and stuff like that. So it's hard to talk about statistics when you're talking about the trad movement. So everything that I'm kind of sharing with you over these past few minutes is just my
anecdotal
evidence, whatever that's worth.
Well, let's kind of come to a head here. So my transition from traditionalism kind of to Novus Ordo was a long time. Got married, been faithful Catholics in the respect that we've never had birth control in our house and all that. Used NFP with varying levels of success. Some of our kids were intentional, some were not. I'll just leave it at that. But it really from day one, though, being married, the struggle with trying to live out this lifestyle and all of the other stuff, the stuff that sends us guys to confession a lot, I could just never shake. And it just grew on me because I was like, I gotta believe this, right? Like, this has got to be true. The church says this, and no matter how hard I try and pray and whatever, I can't either live up to this or I can't make sense of it. To the point where, within a couple of years before we started this podcast, I felt I was at a crossroads, because I was like, either this life is something's wrong, like this is wrong. And if this part of what the church sees is wrong, what else is wrong? Like the whole thing starts to crumble in your mind. Or, we gotta fix this somehow. I mean, or I gotta warn my kids not to get married, because I found it so, if I'm struggling this much, I can't be the only one. And I think finally I just said, someone's got to start talking about this. And that's just kind of opened up just amazing amount of conversations and this and that, to the point where I don't know what the answer is, but I think that, Humani Vitae and, so the catechism, if you follow it to a T, I find nearly impossible for most people to live faithfully. And I don't know what we do with that, but you've kind of come to the conclusion that it can't be right. Like the whole structure behind it has to be wrong. Is that essentially what your conclusion is?
Yeah, I guess. Maybe that's like a little bit stronger than how I would phrase it. I maybe the way that I would phrase it is I just became entirely unconvinced that morality is teleological in nature.
Okay.
And if you do have this kind of broad skepticism about teleology in general, then Catholic sexual ethics kind of falls out the window. Like it's really hard to make heads or tails of why some of these things would be immoral if the kind of Thomistic understanding of how the world works isn't right. That's kind of how I would phrase it. And I'm happy to talk some teleology with you guys if you want to like kind of hear like, I guess specifically why I had like these reservations.
Yeah, go ahead.
So Aquinas will write about in the Summa how so obviously non-procreative marital acts are going to be immoral because you're frustrating the end of the act. Mm-hmm. However, Aquinas writes about an acrobat who uses his hands for walking. The telos of the hand is not to walk. The telos of the hand is to grasp. Right. So is it a sin for the acrobat to use his hands to walk? And Aquinas says, no, it's actually not a sin for the acrobat to use his hands to walk. Why? Because there's no kind of like permanent frustration of the telos. Like it would be sinful to cut off your own hands because now you're permanently preventing yourself from ever using your hands to grab things ever again. But if you're just walking, you're not actually frustrated, like, in the moment maybe, but it's not a permanent kind of thing. My point there then is as long as you're not castrating yourself, I almost thought, is there a better way I could say this? But no. As long as you're not castrating yourself, there should, like, according to that same logic, then any individual non-procreative marital act should not be immoral because you're not stopping yourself from having more kids in the future if you're just choosing not to have kids right now. So it seems to me that either like things like chewing gum, drinking diet soda, walking on your hands, and non-procreative marital acts all have to be intrinsically immoral, which is what the church teaches for non-procreative acts. Intrinsic immorality, which is not to say that like, oh, it might be okay in some circumstances. No, it is not okay in any circumstances. Either all four of those things should be moral or immoral. The church doesn't treat them that way. I still haven't found a good answer as to why. And I have been reading Phaser, just Phaser pretty much. But he's the guy, right? Phaser's the guy. So yeah.
So go ahead. I didn't mean to cut
No, I was
you
just
off.
gonna say that I haven't found answers to these that are intellectually satisfying, despite my attempts. I've had a lot of Catholics on my show, right? Like I've had Jimmy Aiken on, I've had Brian Holdsworth on, Swan Sona. Like I still haven't, and it's not for lack of trying. I promise you guys, I really am trying my hardest. I'm just not finding the answers.
Yeah, I mean, I want you to correct me if my perception of this, if you think it's wrong, but I always had the perception. First of all, the Catholic sexual ethics, I think, is very much built on Aquinas, right? I mean, that is sort of the foundation for it. I always kind of wondered, did one of the popes claim to have some apparition that says, oh, by the way, all sexual acts must be, preserve both ends of marriage? That's not where it came from at all. It really is built on Aquinas, and then there's some scriptural references, but that's really the foundation for it, right?
Yeah, I mean, truthfully, I think that it just kind of came out of the cultural milieu. Like the first century ancient Near East was being Hellenized, and part of Hellenism was that any kind of sex is kind of like gross, don't do it. But if you have to, then fine. Here are the, only do it, don't do it any more than absolutely necessary, kind of. And then that kind of got embedded into our scriptures. And then I think that the Thomistic attitude, which kind of got carried over into Trent, right? Like Trent is like an explicitly Thomistic council. And then just forward, I think is just kind of built off of like it. I think it goes further back than Aquinas. I think it all kind of comes back to this like Hellenized culture.
Yeah, and I've been reading. I don't know if I have the book with me. It's by Noonan, who wrote the whole history of the church's teaching on contraception. And it seems to me that just like you said, like it starts back with Augustine and even a little bit before Augustine. But those guys, well, of course, Augustine had his own backstory, right? He was a pagan, all
party
that
animal,
yeah, which he always had shame about. But there was the Manichaean heresy, I think. One of those, it was one of those that said you should never have sex at all or something like that. And Augustine basically says, well, we got to find a way to justify marriage. So if you're going to do it, at least it's got to be for procreation. But if you get any enjoyment out of it, that's probably sinful.
Right.
And that kind of gets built upon, right? And so by the time Aquinas comes around, it's been written on by so many people, including Augustine. It's like, well, we can't just ignore all this. We've got to find a way to take this that's been treated as authority and fit it into our framework. I think it seems to me is how it came about.
Yeah, it seems like that to me too. This is perhaps a little bit uncharitable to Aquinas and Augustine and all of that, but I've heard people say that tradition is just peer pressure from dead people.
Yeah.
And I think that a lot of the kind of modern Catholic sexual ethics is the result of peer pressure from dead people.
No, I think that's right, because I think people like to think Aquinas was just this brilliant mind sitting, having these abstract thoughts about it, and nothing that came before him, and it was just the power of reason coming up with these things, not being influenced by scripture and what he believed as a Catholic, and that can't be true. Like I don't.
I mean, Aquinas quotes from the philosopher all the time, and the philosopher is Aristotle, of course.
Right.
So Aquinas
Yeah.
is very much so influenced by the people who came before him, for sure.
Right. Right. So I tend to think that we give credit, too much credit to Aquinas. I think we give more credit to Aquinas than Aquinas would give to himself now
Yes.
if he had a chance to read everything that's happened since he wrote this.
100%. I always get a kick out of Aquinas calling his works like nothing
Straw.
better than straw or whatever, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then you read how some people are such crazy like fans. It's almost like their whole personality is built
Yeah.
around St. Thomas Aquinas, which is like
Yeah.
super weird, you know?
Yeah.
But yeah, I think Aquinas is like rolling in his grave, like, you know, because of the way that some people treat his works.
Yeah, I think that's true, and I fell into that. I mean, I know you grow up trying to be a good Catholic, and I think you just you conclude that Aquinas has to be the man. So somehow I got to find a way to accept the fact that he's this genius, and I studied Aquinas. I mean, I had to study it in college, and at the time I was like, man, I didn't know what to make of it. Like, it never made a lot of sense to me, but I was like, well, this has to be right. So it's just the deficiencies are in me, not in
That's right.
Aquinas. But as time has gone on, I've decided maybe he didn't have it all figured out. And that's kind of where I'm at.
That's very trad of you.
And my issue is that people get threatened if you even question it. Like the Marian apparitions, I feel uncomfortable questioning that, but I also want to know the truth. And my faith doesn't rest on that. My faith doesn't rest on whether some of the teachings could be incorrect or they could even be updated. That doesn't matter to me. Like I love Jesus and I love the sacraments, and so I'm Catholic, and that's really the gist of it for me. And it bothers me that people can't think that same way, I guess, where they don't want to know the truth, or they aren't interested to know whether there are some contradictions, or whether there are issues that can be addressed.
Yeah, it's not truth at all costs for everybody. That's just how it is. Not everyone really cares about truth at all costs. For some people, there's a cost that is too high, and they're like, you know what? No, I'm comfortable here. I'm not going to ask any more questions, or if I do, I'm going to accept the first answer that comes my way, and that's going to be that. But speaking of the pressure, like how you guys don't feel like you guys are at liberty to question Marian apparitions and stuff like that, I'm not immune from that pressure too. I don't think I've talked about this since it happened, but so I started my channel in like I've had my channel for like a year and a half now. So about a year and a half ago, my channel wasn't called Kevin Nontradical. It was called the Non-Traditional Catholic. Why? Because I thought about to some extent I still think about myself as Catholic, not in the like practicing kind of way, but in the cultural kind of way. I still, and when somebody wants to tell me you're not a real Catholic, I say, okay, that's fine. I don't care. But so many people got so mad at me for like baiting them with like, I am a Catholic. I'm the non-traditional Catholic. And then here I am. And I'm like talking about how I think that St. Juan Diego never existed as like a real historical person. And they feel totally sucker punched. Right. And so I changed my channel name like within the first month of me starting a channel, because people were getting like really mad at me. And I guess I understand the concern there. Like, I don't want to trick people either. Like, I don't want people watching my channel if they're not willing to engage with my content. But I think that I fall prey a little bit to like fine, if I am going to ask these questions, I'm just not going to market myself in a Catholic way at all.
Yeah, I mean, that's, I struggle with that too, because, I mean, I still struggle too, as someone that is Catholic and definitely considers myself Catholic. I think a lot of Catholics are paranoid about saying something that someone else relies upon that's wrong, and God forbid, it's detrimental to them, and now I'm going to have to account for that. I mean, that's a level of paranoia that I think everyone in the Catholic space deals with, which is why I think they just stay away from controversy and they just kind of repeat the talking points. We've tried to step out of that a little bit. We try to, make it clear from disclaimers or humor that we're just only, trying to have conversations. But people come and they say, "Hey, we love your content." I'm like, I hope I'm right, because I don't know if we are or not, right?
Yeah. So I know exactly what you guys are talking about. We would talk about growing up. We would talk about how like being in a near occasion of sin is a sin out of it, like in and of itself. So don't even become engaged in these kinds of conversations in the first place, because you might be sinning by even entertaining a conversation with somebody who thinks that non-procreative marital acts might be illicit.
Right.
So I get it. I really do. However, we have to kind of, and when I say we, I mean me and you, right? We need to have these conversations, because if we don't, there will be more Kevins. There will be more 22-year-olds forced into shotgun weddings. And by the way, like, nobody was pregnant. My wife was not pregnant at the time that we got married. She's never been pregnant. We more than likely would need some kind of medical intervention if we wanted to have biological children, which we're fine with. We don't think like we're not like, mad or sad, or we're okay. We're fine. Maybe we'll adopt one day. But the point of that was to say is we were not pregnant, but I used the term shotgun wedding because I think it kind of describes what I had. But I think there'll be more of those if me and you don't have these kinds of if we don't struggle out loud with these teachings, then there'll be more Kevins, and I really hope that there aren't.
Well, and those conversations had to have happened at some point, right? Like, what makes them prohibited now?
Yeah, I mean, it's, knowing thyself is one of the hardest things you can do, and then knowing thyself in a counterfactual sense is harder yet. But it's possible that I wouldn't have left Catholicism whole cloth if there were shows like your guys's that was on YouTube 5 years ago, 6 years ago, 7 years ago, all that stuff. But everything that is on YouTube is just so sanitary, it's just so unoffensive. And when I say unoffensive, I don't mean like not misogynistic. I just mean like it's very safe for the kind of conservative Catholic. That's what I mean. Yeah. So
what do you how do you approach then? Well, okay. How do you approach sexual morality then? Or how do you think, let's say if you were still Catholic and had kind of gotten past the teleology, but say, well, there's got to be a better way to approach this. What do you think's the way to look at it?
Oh man.
And it's deconstruction is easy, but finding something better is not always.
Yeah. Well, I think the part of the question that's really throwing me for a loop is like, if you were still Catholic, and like, I think that's throwing me for a loop because like there are Catholics who are like, more Jesuit, and then there are Catholics who are less Jesuit. So I think that if I was Catholic, I'd probably have really similar, if not identical, sexual ethics to the ethics that I have right now. I would just be chilling with Father James Martin instead of with Matt Frad, and that ethic is just like if there's two consenting adults, I really don't have a problem with it. And maybe that's like too libertarian for a lot of people, but that's where I fall.
Married or same sex, anything like that, you would say, as long as you're consenting.
Yep. I don't think that any kind of gay marital unions would be immoral. I don't think that premarital sexual relations would be necessarily immoral. I mean, certainly they can be, right? If the R word. But barring something like that, like assuming that they are two people who are of sound mind, and they can consent and they do, then I don't think any of that stuff is immoral.
Here's a fundamental problem that I think exists in Catholicism, or at least the circles, is I think people, when they find a part about our our beings, our inclinations, our desires that we don't like or can't fit within the rules, we just attribute that to the devil, original sin, or whatever. I mean, that's just kind of the throwaway. Well, that's a disordered thing. That's from the devil. That's not the way.
Concupiscence.
Yeah, I mean, I don't like. I always ask. Okay, so what did Adam's sex life look like before the fall? Like, did he just not have the same sexual drive that we have? Did he just have greater control? Like, when I think about that, more and more, I think more, this is just the way we are. This is our nature. This isn't concupiscence. And then we're just constantly trying to, fit this natural existence into these rules that, like you said, came out over time.
Yeah, I mean, this is the way that we are. Like this, humans are animals, and animals like us, they want to reproduce. And marriage is just a social contract anyway. Like I don't understand, to this day, I don't understand why saying the magic words is going to like make something okay. And it is saying the magic words per se that makes the act licit or not. And I just don't understand that, like, in the slightest. And yeah, I mean, your point about the garden is a good one. Don't quote me on this, but I seem to recall from the recesses of my mind some kind of sermon at my FSSP chapel about how there actually wouldn't have been any kind of marriage or marital relations pre-fall, but that we are punished with not just pregnancy, but the whole part. Getting pregnant in the first place is part of the punishment from the fall. And God would have just created us each individually. Like nobody would have ever been pregnant. Just God would have said, boop person, boop person, boop person, if there had never been any original sin. So I could be making that up, but I do seem to recall that from somewhere.
We had a trad on Twitter try to say that to us just within the last couple of weeks. So I know it's out there.
I'm not crazy. I very well may have heard that.
It's hard to believe or see where they came up with that logic. I don't know.
I mean, at some point, this stuff just starts to fly in the face of science, like so bad that you have to kind of sit there and scratch your head a little bit and be like, okay, I can suspend my disbelief for a minute.
Yeah.
But like, wow. Like, so I grew up young earth creationist. I don't know about you guys, but, there's like young earth level creationism style suspension of disbelief going on in the idea that there would have been no sex at all without original sin.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it seems to me that even stepping back a step further, if you kind of go back to, like I said, to the early century Christians, there was this very negative approach to sex. It was something to be avoided. Of course, they were thinking the second coming was coming around too, so there's no need to procreate. So you got all that going on. Yeah, so you've got this very, Gnosticism and Stoicism that, the body is bad. And that kind of really was the philosophy that kind of prevailed until, and then you sort of got this theology of the body that came out in the, in the 1960s or whatever. And then you got the Christopher West out there. Now we're so far removed from that. Now sex is like a reenactment of the mass, and it's the sacrifice of the mass, and the man's semen is the child. It's like, God, it's such a, to the extent that I follow these podcasts, and you got couples calling in, and they're so paranoid because they're thinking about sex in just the, the natural carnal way that we do. It's enjoyable, it's physically pleasurable and stuff, that they feel like they're unworthily approaching this sacrament, that they're scared to have sex. So then we've kind of swung to this, I think, equally implausible approach to it. And I think it's somewhere in between. I think it's a wonderful thing. It's terrific between men and women. It produces babies. It
produces a connection.
Yeah. And I think but I think either of those extremes just doesn't seem very plausible to me, especially like you said, when you look at just the science and the physiology of how we work. Something that doesn't add up about those two extremes.
it's almost like the one extreme was entirely written by celibate men or something. It's wild.
Yeah,
you
makes
know?
I just find it hard to believe that God would punish us with pleasurable sex. Like if it wasn't happening before the fall, like, oh, you're bad. Now you're gonna enjoy this, but it's gonna be bad. I just don't see that.
Yeah. Well, this is one of my more conspiratorial ideas, but I have half a mind to believe that some of the people who first originated these ideas were asexual. They legitimately were disgusted by the whole idea of sex. And that would explain some and I'm talking about people like Paul of Tarsus here, the way that Paul writes about sex, he might have been asexual. I don't know. And I don't think anybody can ever know, right? But there seems to be in some, not everybody, but in some people's writings, like not Christopher West, right? I don't think that Christopher West is asexual. But there are some Christian writers who I wouldn't be shocked if I had heard that they, if I died and went to heaven and they were there with me and I was like, hey man, were you asexual? They were like, yeah, man, I was. I'd be like, oh, get out of town. I wouldn't be shocked. So,
we have some theories about some people out there, and I can't help but know that even some of the current people, when they will occasionally say they have a history of severe porn and masturbation addiction that they're very shameful about. Like, I don't think you can just abstract yourself from that. Like, I think it does seep into how you look at these things.
What exactly do you mean by that? Like, you mean that people who are ashamed of having a porn addiction might come to view all sex in a negative light?
Yes. I think they're very hard. They're very hard and fast. Like, no, it's like, you can abstain. You never have to masturbate. All this, like,
or you should never look at your wife with desire.
yeah, you should, but I think,
yeah.
I mean, I've had my own natural battles, but I've never had those kinds of extreme addictions, debilitating things that I think a lot of people in this space once had and maybe still have. But I think I just think I see a lot of that seeping in and how they approach it, whereas we kind of approach it as, let's be practical about this. Let's be reasonable. Let's not get all bent out of shape about it to the point where you're scrupulous and your faith is in jeopardy. That's kind of our approach.
Yeah, I mean, the way that these things are written, they come across as somebody who's written by like a sex obsessed person.
Yeah.
And don't get me wrong, I think that sex is one of the most deeply human things that a person can do. I think it's a grand old time. I'm a big fan.
Yeah.
However,
yeah,
it is not the end all be all.
Right.
And the way that some like Christian writers historically have written about sex, it makes it sound like it really is the end all be all. And you're like, oh, hold your horses. Like, it's a good time, but aren't we being like a little dramatic maybe? And yeah, maybe you're right. Maybe people are being dramatic because they're the kinds of people who maybe have like a compulsive personality or like a addictive personality, perhaps. I don't know. That's a interesting observation. I think, sounds plausible to me.
Yeah, I just see it happening. We get kind of the private messages from people that I just see this pattern forming. But well, let me switch gears and see what you think of this, because one of the things that was really, let's just talk about, we talk about other acts on here, sort of the quote unquote illicit acts, depending on who you ask. Not even birth control, but just stuff that husbands and wives
PJs
do.
and
that kind of stuff, right?
Mm-hmm. Trying to be a little PG here with
right. So what I struggled with is that it seems to me that certain sins, let's say adultery, we believe it's wrong, but there's also a foreseeable and tangible harm that can come from that. I mean, you're hurt, you're doing it behind your spouse's back. That's harmful to them. You may get someone else pregnant. You're bringing kids into the world. Like, you can see like the sort of the earthly consequences of that are bad for the marriage. Same thing if you're just randomly having sex before you're married and you get children born out of wedlock. Like, there's harms there. And even like birth control, like, some of the hormonal ones are not necessarily good for people. But then you look at these kinds of things and like, what's the harm here? We actually posed that question. I got Christopher West to answer this question on his show. I says, you said that other acts, BJs and stuff, are immoral. And first of all, can you tell me where in the catechism it says that? And two, aside from the sin itself, what's the harm to the relationship if a couple does that? And his heart just about couldn't handle it.
Almost gave out.
He just like, what do you mean if besides the sin itself? If it's sinful, it's got to be bad for the marriage. And, he can never really answer that question. But, everyone we talk to, and we don't share too much about our personal stories, but everyone I've talked to that's involved in it says it's been no harm to the marriage and it's only helped the marriage, when the option is extended periods of abstinence, which doesn't seem to help anybody. Like, there's the harm.
The abstinence is very difficult.
Yeah.
Very seemingly harmful, more so than the other acts, at least in my lived experience.
Yeah.
But
can I just pause just to say, Christopher West, I think that you're a very lovely man. I think I would like hanging out with you. And if I ever bump into you in a pub, I will buy you a beer. Okay. I wanted to say that because I was starting to feel guilty about talking about him so much.
Yeah.
And so, I legitimately do mean that. I legitimately do mean that I would hang out and drink a beer with.
Yeah.
Okay. That being said, 100%. There is a cart and a horse. And I think that the sin is being, is the cart that's being put before the horse here.
Yeah.
Where we have our conclusions and now we just need to kind of arrive at them. So we're going to do whatever we need to do to arrive at our conclusions, rather than kind of following the truth wherever the truth may lead, even if the truth leads to the really scary conclusion that maybe a husband and a wife can bond in other ways besides procreative marital unions.
Yep.
God forbid.
Yeah. How horrible would that be that everyone's happy now? I mean,
it's the worst.
I mean, it's got to be more suffering in marriage.
Yeah, that's the Catholic thing. Like we say that our marriage is going so good now. What are we doing wrong?
Yeah, it is. So I didn't know, not like personally, all of these families with huge numbers of kids that were at my chapel, but like there was more than one family with like 10 plus kids, like, like a lot. And occasionally I would hear complaining about how difficult it must be. I mean, you have 9. Is it ever difficult? I bet.
All the time. I mean, it is difficult. Yeah.
And so it seems obvious to me that the people who write these laws are the people who don't have to live out these laws. And that's kind of, that's where I'll leave it.
Yeah. And I used to be skeptical of that. I was like, oh, the whole, what does a celibate know about marriage? And I was like, oh, but I do believe it. I mean, I genuinely think that following sort of the theology of the body or whatever to the T, or you follow the old school where you don't do any of that, it's marital debt and the wife just has to have as many kids as possible. I just think that is a far more difficult life than celibacy ever will be. I mean, that's just my personal feeling. And I think that being a constantly celibate man, because I remember what it was like before I got married. I mean, I was 23, 24. The difficulty of just never having sex was not near as difficult it is periodically not having sex because of NFP. Like, that's just, I spent a lot more time in the confessional as a married man than I did as a non-married man. And that's just,
I'm amazed by that too. I'm serious.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, I don't spend any time in the confessional now.
Yeah.
But honest to God, if I came back, like, let's say that tomorrow I had a Damascus Road experience and I became, God zapped the knowledge into my brain that, Pope Francis is indeed the Pope of the one true church. And, I went to confession. I and I don't mean to sound like pompous in any kind of way, but like I honestly don't think that the church would tell me that the mortal sins that I've been committing for the past 5 years have been mortal sins, because I honestly do not believe them to be immoral, right? And I guess I got this from Thomas Plaga, who I know, you know, I watched your guys' episode with him, but he's all about having an informed conscience, and I think that's very important. And then all the trads fire back with, yes, but you need to conform your conscience to the teaching of the church. And like, all right, man, that's kind of not my battle. You know what I mean? Like I'm on the outside now, you know, whether I want it to be or not.
And that's the opposite of what the primacy of conscience is all about, right?
That is the exact opposite of what the primacy of conscience is all about. It's the polar opposite.
And we've had, so the one episode that came out yesterday with Leo, Father Leo, his clerical state is not clear to me, but was a priest for many years. That's what he talked about. We had another guy on that's a follower of the show that we were talking about the whole thing of conscience. And that is something that I had never really wrestled with. I mean, when I was going through this sort of intellectual struggle myself, that was not a bridge that I even knew existed, that this conscious thing. All I thought was, I've got to find a way to bend my will and behavior to this truth. And the idea that, you know, someone could in good conscience, let's say, use birth control or these other things, just, I didn't know that was possible. And I'm not convinced that's true, but I'm certainly open to that. I mean, I think that is a plausible and maybe the plausible resolution to all this, but like, again, you're not going to get the Pope or the bishops or the priests to talk about that.
Can I ask you guys a question?
Yeah.
So I evidently, I guess, whatever faith I had was a little bit more rigid and brittle than your guys's, because we've spent this entire time agreeing, right? And I call myself not Catholic, and you guys call yourself Catholic. I'm sure that a lot of that has to do with the way that I was brought up, but you know, my faith kind of got put under one load and it snapped, and your guys's was put under, from what I can tell, the exact same load and did not break. What would break it for you guys? So what I mean by that is, like, let's say that you found out that or let's say that you became convinced that the church was not just wrong about contraception, but like, let's say that you also became convinced that the church was also wrong about like the nature of gay marriages too. And then you know, and you can imagine a scenario where you just keep on adding one thing after the other after the other. And I have to imagine that the faith snaps at some point. But do you know, like, do you have a bridge in mind where that bridge would be a bridge too far? Or is that kind of just impossible to tell because like you'll have to cross that bridge when you get there?
For me personally, we've kind of talked about this. It would never happen for me just because I know Jesus existed. There are sources from many different places that show he existed and he died and he had followers. And at a very basic level, I love the sacraments, and those would never be proven false. So there's no way that anything that would change within the church would affect my faith.
Not even go something like High Church Anglican or something like that, where you're like, well, yeah, you know, I'm maybe I'm not convinced that like, you know, the Pope is super necessary, but High Church Anglicanism is just diet Catholicism anyway, you know? So
sure. I mean, I don't know. I think for me personally, I would always consider myself Catholic.
Me too, for the record, but sorry, go ahead.
We're in the same group.
Well, I still think of myself as Catholic because I can't change the way that I was raised. That's all that I mean there.
Mm-hmm. I would say two things. Number one, and I think I sent you an email. I said, this interview scared me more than any because you are like, I could see myself being in your situation had things played out different, or maybe in the future, but so far I've been able to, I guess, block the punches enough to not get knocked down. But for me, I would say that, okay, then what? Because all the flaws, if you will, that I see in Catholicism seem as present or more apparent than in all the alternatives. I've personally had enough, I would say, mystical experiences with God or the divine, including how I met my wife and all that, that like I'm like there's no doubt in my mind that that happened and it wasn't just circumstance and randomness, that there's got to be something out there, and I can't see anything that is more supportable as a whole than Catholicism, because everything else just has even more problems that I don't know how we would deal with. So that's kind of how I reconcile. Like, I'm going to either make this work, or I mean I have to make this work, because I'm not to the point where I can just suddenly say God can't exist, because I've just had too many experiences of the divine to discredit that. That's kind of what keeps me going. I don't know.
So I'll turn the question around. So what makes Jesus not convincing to you, I guess, as far as just praying to Jesus, or even praying to the Trinity, or praying to God? Like what part of that is not convincing to you as far as to consider yourself, like a practicing Catholic today, is, other than not going to church and stuff like that?
Yeah. So 2 quick points of agreement before I answer that question is just, I think that personal experience is the best reason to believe anything. So like you guys both said, personal experiences with like a living God, that's it. I'd be done. Like I'd be convinced too. Like personal experience by my lights is the best way to believe anything. And there was a second point that I already forgot, so I'll come back to it if I can. But then to answer your question, so part of me wants to say I actually don't, like, broadly speaking, I don't say that like there's no way that Jesus was God. I do. So like that would be a lie. That's why I said I almost said it. I didn't say it, but I almost said it. But I'm considerably more comfortable saying I don't think that the Catholic Church that I grew up in is the one true church. I'm far more comfortable saying that than I am saying, therefore, all of Christianity is incorrect. I'm probably like considerably more non-Catholic Christian today than I was when I was a trad Catholic. However, I don't call myself Christian in any sense, not outside of the cultural context. And the primary reason for that, I guess, is I think that I just had so much confidence in the church that I think that like when my confidence in the church was kind of like, ooh, like I'm not at all confident in this organization anymore. I think that my confidence in like the accounts that we find in the Gospels also fell considerably. So I've spent a lot of time reading, Dr. Brent Petrie and stuff like that. And I kind of fall on the most popular scholarly opinion that there almost definitely was, I won't even say almost, there definitely was a Jesus of Nazareth who was crucified by the Romans, and he died by crucifixion. I'm on board with all of that. And I guess the reason I'm not on board with all the supernatural stuff is because I think I just have this really empirically biased brain where I just think about things like the laws of nature and how I'm more certain that the laws of nature obtain everywhere than I am that they would be broken ever, if that makes sense. So it's very like Humean in that kind of way. But yeah, that was a long-winded answer, and at the same time not at all sufficient to answer the question.
No, I understand.
But, yeah.
I mean, I will say that I think this is where people find traditional Catholicism attractive, is that we like to think that if there's a perfect God out there, there's got to be a perfect reflection of God's truth in the world. Like God wouldn't have just kind of left us randomly out here getting stuff wrong. Like someone has to have it all right. I mean, I still maybe think that's true, but
Oh, I do, man. What about the primacy of conscience? It's kind of like the missing link too. Like, I mean, if you can take into account people's situations, and they're able to discern for themselves if they really think and pray about it. I mean, I don't have an issue with that.
I don't either, except that the church does say intrinsic evil. Like it doesn't say, this is not good for you, or we don't encourage this, or like, no, this is great. Like, this is intrinsically disordered. I have a hard time reconciling that language with, oh, by the way, my conscience can be such that it's not intrinsically evil for me. That I still haven't figured out if I can
Doesn't bother me.
reconcile those 2 points.
I don't know.
I don't know.
I have a lot of respect for our Jesuit brothers. I'm a huge fan of Father Raymond D. Brown. He passed away 20 years ago, I guess, at this point, at 15. But he wrote an introduction to the New Testament. It's like the book that I go to all the time. And he seems like he would be somebody who is like, hey, yeah, church gets things wrong sometimes. Deal with it. I'm still a priest,
Yeah.
And he died a priest in good standing. And I think that's super cool. And sure, I think that the kind of faith that I was raised in is one that does not allow for any kind of flexibility at all. But I think that the church would serve itself and her members very well by being a little bit more open-minded.
I mean, I totally agree, and that's kind of the rub. That's kind of where we find ourselves, because the common cliche is, well, something's true whether, like Thomas Palega likes to get up and say, oh, 90% of Catholics don't believe Humani Vitae, and 4% of us use natural family planning, and they always say, well, it doesn't matter if 1% got it. Like, the truth is what the truth is, and I'm just like, well, okay, why would God give us these rules that 99% of us are not going to be able to follow, like that, and we're just all going to hell because of it? Like that doesn't seem compatible with the God in my mind.
I would be fired from my job if all of the things that I designed only worked 4% of the time.
Right.
No, and that's where like I view things differently as far as I think God meets people wherever they're at, and if they earnestly seek God, he'll be right there with them.
Yeah, I mean, the last sentence of Ernest Hemingway's "The Sun Also Rises" comes to my mind, which is, "Isn't it pretty to think so?" I mean that like unironically too. Like it is pretty to think so. I guess I'm just kind of incapable of thinking so because of the way that I was raised. Yeah.
That is the hazard of sort of, not to keep kind of peeing in the boots of the trads, but that is sort of the problem with that environment, is when a piece of it starts to crumble, you really can't support it anymore. I somehow managed to get out of the building before it collapsed on me, and I'm much happier now than I was. Well, I don't know. I was happy as a trad until I started to struggle with some of these things, and then I was very unhappy as a trad, and now I feel at peace where we're at, because this is starting to make more sense to me. My state of mind is better, my marriage is better, like everything is better under how I'm living this stuff now.
And I just think that there's no way that we can be more merciful than God. There's no way.
Yeah.
Like we can look at people that are doing all kinds of things and think, well, there's might be a reason for that. They suffered as a child or whatever. And for people to think that God isn't merciful like that bothers me as well. I don't know, that's the part that gives me hope. I think very few people are doing things spitefully towards God. Like just very few people. I mean, sure, there's some people that do that, but it's very rare. I think that's where mortal sin is the larger risk.
I certainly don't disagree, but I just know that the trad response to that is, well, yeah, but he's also infinitely just. And if you do something intrinsically evil, what do you justly deserve?
Yeah, but the greater the sinner, the greater the right they have to his mercy. You know, that's in Saint Faustina's diary. I mean, that's beautiful.
Oh, Saint Faustina, that modernist garbage. Sorry.
No, I know. I'm aware of the trad remarks
Right.
regarding Saint Faustina, but I love Saint Faustina for obvious reasons. It makes sense.
That's too hippie, too lovey-dovey. We need
My-
more fire and brimstone.
When I was sort of at the peak of my traditionalism, I was a late teenager, and my confirmation sponsor was Saint Alphonsus Liguori, and I was reading all of Liguori's books, and I can't even read the guy now. Like
I know.
I can't relate to any of that. In a strange, the way I kind of the way approach this kind of practically is that either that sort of that rigid traditional view it can't be right and something else has to be right, or if that's right, it's not going to matter. There's probably no hope for me anyway, so I might as well make the best of this situation, because I never could figure out how to live that life flawlessly or even close to flawlessly. So I guess that's how I look at it. Either I'm doomed or I'm not.
Yeah, I mean, I just don't think it, like, I don't think that the prescriptions set out by the Roman Catholic Church are such that a marriage will be the healthiest that it possibly can be.
Yep.
It's fair.
Yep.
Yeah.
It's difficult at best.
Yeah. 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 That's easy for me to say because I'm kind of on the outside.
We agreed on everything, like you said, for the most part.
I know. And that's like the funny part is that we do too much agreeing, you know?
Well, so we're working up to episode 200, which is going to all be about other acts, and without showing my hand too much, I mean, we sort of, the only way
That's
to
a
work
funny
it.
pun right there.
The way, I mean, I think the Catholic, I think the church can save itself and offer a very authentic, accessible view of marriage without sort of capitulating to birth control. Is going to have to allow other acts or something like that. Otherwise, I just don't. I just think it's so impossible.
How you can walk the tightrope through natural family planning and prolonged abstinence and still come out the other side. I mean,
Yeah. I mean, I even just want to push back against that word capitulating when it
Mhm.
comes to birth control. For the life of me, I cannot see what's immoral about it.
Well, I only in here, I guess I'm trying to
Be a good Catholic.
well, trying to find the loophole in the law rather than to change the law, like Humanae Vitae, and I mean, there's plenty of very clear church teaching that talks about contraception. It would be very difficult for us to unwind that, but I haven't found anything that expressly says, and oh, by the way, no other acts. Like, I think there's a gray area there that we could
Yeah, I mean, could be, but
maybe.
the church has done an about face before.
Mhm.
Slavery is a pretty good example.
Mhm.
Right? Like there are documents from the dicastery of the doctrine of the faith that explicitly say that there's nothing wrong per se
Mhm.
with slavery. But ever since Vatican II, the church has been very much so like, no, slavery is like an insult to the human person and it is intrinsically immoral.
Mhm.
So, I mean, that's an about face.
Mhm.
well, and that's interesting because one of the arguments is that this stuff has never changed. You know,
Mhm.
even though there have been slight changes, throughout history to different teachings like that. So it would,
Yeah.
it makes us hopeful that maybe something like this could be addressed.
Me too. Me too. I honestly would love it if I was ever able to call myself Catholic again without having to seriously get creative with what it means to be Catholic.
Mhm.
Now, for that to happen, either I would have to change a whole lot from where I am right now, or the church would have to change a whole lot. The church, when it changes at all, seems to change very, 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 very slowly. So I am not holding my breath on the church changing. It's possible they'll change in the future. But I guess I'm also not holding my breath there. Only because I guess I've been around the block a few times, right? And I don't know, maybe one day it will just click. But I've been looking really hard for for a number of years now, and it hasn't clicked
Well,
yet. So we'll see.
so let me ask you this then, and you mentioned that the sort of the sexual ethics was sort of the real pivotal moment for you. And let's just say tomorrow we woke up and Pope Francis and all the bishops and cardinals says, "Hey, we got that wrong. Any consensual sexual activity between adults is morally illicit as long as it's,
I can see within marriage,
respectful
maybe.
and whatever. Don't be kind of like gluttony, like don't be abusing it, but like be reasonable and reasonably open to life and all this kind of stuff. If that was sort of not an impediment, are there too many other fractures that you see now that you couldn't like come back, or would that be
And just be a Novus Ordo Catholic?
Yeah, would that be a major improvement that you'd be like, okay, I can maybe embrace this now?
Yeah, I mean, it would be a major improvement.
Yeah.
If there was some kind of super strict, like you have to believe in like a actual bodily resurrection, like you can't get hippie with it at all, then that would still be some kind of impediment to me. But as long as we allowed like a healthy Jesuit reinterpretation of all that stuff, then that would be another like barrier removed. And then after that, it's just gonna be like the little things, like the church has claimed that canonizations are infallible, but I don't think that Saint Juan Diego existed as a historical person. So like that gets like a little weird when you're canonizing somebody who I don't think ever existed. But like that would be the worst of my problems with the church if those other two things kind of got resolved.
Yeah.
And I don't think I would like let that stay. Like if I had like some strong desire to get the kind of Catholic community, like I wouldn't be like, no, I'm not associating with any of you guys because I don't think that Saint Juan Diego was a real person, right? Like I wouldn't let that get in the way.
Yeah, I mean, we don't spend. I mean, as I was telling Jonah the other day, there's a difference between things that we're supposed to believe as Catholics, but don't really interfere with my day-to-day life, like the virginity of the Blessed Virgin or the existence of purgatory and all that. Although maybe someday it will affect me. It's not an immediate concern, but whether Juan Diego was a saint or not doesn't worry me so much. But the stuff that affects my day-to-day existence does.
Yeah.
And so I don't know. We can't be alone. I mean, there's enough guys out there that have to struggle with this, and ladies, that we at least feel like we're doing something useful here, because for me, this sort of like you, this was a pivotal point of crisis in my faith, because like I said, I just couldn't keep reconciling all this, and this has helped. Talking to some of these people about primacy of conscience and all that kind of stuff is helping me. So maybe it'll help other people too that are really at a crossroads in their faith because of it.
I know that you've helped people. So I have people who are kind of like on my channel a lot, and like they're in my Discord server and stuff, and they've talked about you guys, and how like the world needs more Uncharted Catholic Man podcasts out there talking about more about these issues, because these are the issues that are creating more Kevins, and for each of these podcasts, we're saving X amount of Kevins from happening again, and I think that's an awesome aspiration, and I think that you guys are accomplishing it.
Well, thanks, man. That's great to hear.
We need more. Yeah, we need more, not less.
It's just nice to know that you're not alone, like you could support each other and learn from each other, and I think we do need more of that. So appreciate those comments, and we need more of you. Like I do enjoy reading your content. I don't have as much time. What I found is when you start generating a lot of your own stuff, it's hard to make time to listen to other people's stuff. But your stuff on Lourdes or whatever, I know you did one on Eucharistic miracles. That was always the one thing I always thought, like, to me, that looks so impossible to explain away, Eucharistic miracles, that's always kind of the trump card that we like to throw out there. Well, look at it. Clearly, that's not just some scientific accident, but you've analyzed that too, I guess.
Yeah, and I'll keep this super brief.
Yeah.
My main problem with all those things is that they were never analyzed by like any
Yeah.
scientists that weren't hand selected by the church. So it's kind of like,
What about
okay.
what about the histopathology for the Eucharistic miracle that happened in was it Buenos Aires when Pope Francis was there? Before he was Pope.
Yeah,
Like the histopathology, like the photographs that I've seen, they look like muscle tissue, in my opinion. And I
I
don't know
think that
how that can
they
be fake. And they were analyzed by actual scientists. They may have been picked by the church, but they were qualified.
yes. So I have a video on the Buenos Aires Eucharistic miracle, and the person who led the investigation was, I forget the man's name, but Zugaba. He wrote about how they couldn't get any DNA from, and he
Oh,
led
I've
both.
wondered about that.
Yeah, so he led both Argentina, the Buenos Aires miracle, and Tixla, Mexico. He ran both of those. And so I may be thinking about Tixla instead of Buenos Aires, but he ran both. And for one of them, they actually submitted the sample for DNA testing and they couldn't get any DNA. Now, how do you not get DNA from a super well preserved muscle sample?
Well, it depends on what kind of analysis they did. They would need to have oh, it, it, I don't know. It's something that if they didn't do the right kind of analysis, I think it might not work, or perhaps Jesus' DNA is so different that they couldn't get it to work. And there's your
That's
trad explanation.
exactly what Zugaba said. He
I
said,
would think it's unlikely though.
so he said, so here's what I will say about the half-life of DNA is 521 years.
Mhm.
So like, and just consider the fact that we've gotten DNA from woolly mammoths and stuff like that, right? And now, granted, those are going to be better preserved than a Eucharistic miracle will be. But we're talking about thousands of years versus days or maybe weeks or months, but still, DNA should have been present. They couldn't find any. Zugaba's explanation is because Jesus actually didn't have the same DNA that the rest of us have. And why? Because half of your DNA comes from your mother and half of it comes from your father. So Jesus only had half of each of his chromosomes because he didn't have an earthly father. So
That sounds like a heresy almost. I don't know.
I know, but that is legitimately what the quote unquote scientific paper said. And when I read that, my jaw was on the floor, and I was like, okay, this is clearly not a work of like this was, and obviously not published in a scientific journal. Like these things would be,
Because the Y, and that is an interesting thing about, because the Y chromosome does come from the father, unless Mary herself was genetically unique, and there are XXY women and that sort of thing. So I mean, it just makes you wonder what happened there.
I've always been led to believe that they always go out and pick non-friendly scientists. Like they go out and find the atheists and stuff that are going to be scrupulous. That's apparently not true. So that's,
I always heard that too. And I think I can confirm where that does come from. And that is for a lot of canonization processes.
Okay.
However, the same standards do not apply for Marian apparitions, Eucharistic miracles, anything like that. And my understanding too is that it's not even always applied in canonization processes because miracles have actually been dropped entirely from the cause for canonization ever since 2006 or something like that. So somebody can become a saint today without having any miracles attributed to them. So there's actually no miracle investigations at all anymore.
And it's difficult to explain away that they couldn't detect Mary's DNA in him, in the Eucharistic miracle. Like that is difficult to explain away. I would say that.
Not to mention, when we're detecting DNA, it's not like we're detecting entire chromosomes at once. What we're doing is detecting the pairs of the acid chains, right? Like we're detecting the adenine, the guanine, the cytosine, and the thymine.
Yep.
And so there's no reason why we shouldn't be able to detect half of a chromosome. Like if there's a half a chromosome, we should know about it.
The DNA sequence have to be so unique that they could not detect it, at least with the methods at that time.
Right. And I do think it's kind of interesting that, so granted, DNA sequencing is way cheaper and easier today than it was 20 years ago, 30 years ago, 40 years ago. so I manage clinical trials in pharma. Like that's what I do for a living. We do DNA sequencing on every single blood sample that we pull for pretty much every single patient that goes into a clinical trial. We do DNA sequencing because that's how cheap it's gotten. That wasn't the case back then, but I do think it's interesting that there don't appear to be any Eucharistic miracles anymore that like have like real blood samples in them, because today we'd be able to test the DNA in the blood and then compare it to the next Eucharistic miracle that comes up. And if it's not the same DNA, then it's not the same person and we have a problem.
Yep.
And if we do it once and we truly do believe that this is Jesus's DNA, then great, we've gotten Jesus's DNA and maybe we can clone him. Like,
It's
like
a big gamble though. Who wants to roll those dice, right?
Right. Yeah. So I'm broadly skeptical of Eucharistic miracles.
Okay.
Yeah.
I don't know how, like, and the histopathology for that miracle again, it didn't look perfect, but it just makes me wonder what happened there. Why that, how a histopathologist could have seen that and without it being an error, because histopathology would be something that would be difficult to mix up as far as you have the tissue, you have the slide, or you make slides from that. And I just don't know how that could have gotten messed up.
Yeah. So the only honest answer I can give you is me too. I don't know how it could have gotten messed up too. What is interesting, and I forget again if this is Tixla or Sokolka or Buenos Aires, but for one of the more modern, I'm not talking about Lanciano, for one of the more modern ones, it got sent to one histopathologist who said that this is skin cells. It got sent to another histopathologist who said these are heart muscle tissue. It got sent back to the original one. He goes, oh no, this is actually heart muscle tissue. So he got back in line, which I kind of thought was funny. Now I don't remember which one that was.
Okay.
But and also all that these scientists are doing are looking at it under a microscope. They're looking at the slide under a microscope. They're not doing any kind of rigorous testing for the most part. And there's no actual like reports that are being like published on these miracles. It's literally just a Catholic associated like investigator takes a sample, mails it to his friend. By the way, in the case of Buenos Aires, I think they mailed it to a histopathologist who had just published a book on Catholicism. Like, it's like, guys, like this is really not looking great. Yeah. And I pulled up some pictures of the Buenos Aires miracle, and I actually remember this one now. It's quite possible that that's actually mold. If you just Google Buenos Aires Eucharistic miracle and then you look at like the top results, it'll show you this picture of a host being suspended in water, and there is a red like goopy looking substance on top of it, which it looks a lot like coagulated blood. But there's also a species of mold that looks just like that. And I don't know if they ever did any kind of mold testing. And then there's another one that looks a lot like mold because it starts growing some black mold on top of the red goop. So is that mold on mold, or is that mold on human blood? Like, okay. But yeah, Eucharistic miracles are similar to Marian apparitions in as much as there are folk legends that are told about them.
Yeah.
And then you actually read what was published on them, and you find first that very little is actually published about them. Lanciano is the most well-attested one. But then when you do read what is published about it, you realize that it's not as fantastic as the folk legend makes it out to be.
So do people, sort of the trads and stuff, just kind of give the same response to the existence of dinosaur bones, that God or the devil left those there just to keep us guessing enough? I don't know. I mean,
when I was growing up, I was taught that like the dinosaurs existed pre-flood, the flood killed all the dinosaurs, and then modern scientists are just using circular reasoning. Like they're like, oh, the dinosaurs must have lived millions of years ago, and we found these in these rocks, and then these rocks are millions of years old, and if we found these in the million-year-old rocks, then the dinosaur bones are, and it's all circular reasoning. Of course, that's not how it works, but that is how we were taught about it. So it's weird. The younger
you can reason you can reason away anything to fit what you believe, I guess.
Yeah. And it's a lot of this stuff that kind of like, I think that a more naturalism friendly Catholic church would be a Catholic church that I'm much quicker to join or rejoin, I guess. Because even though it's not dogma, it's not in the catechism, it's never officially stated that you have to believe in these Eucharistic miracles and these Marian apparitions. It's de facto the case that you're supposed to, you know? And so I would be like a pariah if I was this like hyper skeptical Catholic, like, you know. So I think a more naturalistically friendly Catholic church would be one that I would be more quick to join. However, I don't know if that would do more like, yay, they gain Kevin, but they lose half of the, of the practicing Catholics in the world. So, I understand that the church can't cater to my silly little whims, but.
Well, all I can say is the benefit to being focused entirely on the problems that we deal with. I don't have time to think about evolution and young Earth creationism and dinosaur bones. I see those guys, wondering about the moon landing. Like literally, guys, I got these problems I got to figure out first, and at the rate I'm going, I'm never going to get it figured out. So that's not going to be the source of my spiritual demise. So.
Yeah.
So anyway, well, we've probably been going on long enough. Is there anything? I don't know if we got to what you had kind of wanted to talk about. I guess we agree too much, but
I know. Honestly, I thought this whole conversation was awesome. There's pretty much nothing that I would like to add to this other than I said it once, but I'll say it again. We need more conversations like the conversations that you have on YouTube.
Yeah.
So if you can't double your production output, fine, so be it. But then let's foster other channels starting up and having conversations like these too, because the work that you guys are doing is very important, and you guys are doing that work in a way that I can't. You guys are on the inside, so to speak. And so the conversations that you have in that sense are even more important than the ones that I'm having, because while it's easy to dismiss me, it's not so easy to dismiss your fellow Catholic. So I'm a big fan of the work that you guys do. I am excited to see episode 200 and then 300 and then 400 and all the ones that come after. So
we appreciate that. And I hope we can have you back on again. I think we could have some other really interesting conversations. So
you bet. I'm going to watch your videos on Eucharistic miracles and Marian apparitions now.
Some of them are kind of long. I get a little wordy. So, make sure that you, while you're working out or something, don't sit there and just watch it, because that's
right.
A long time.
It's hard to be succinct when you get talking about these things, but
you want to do it justice,
YouTube, yeah, it is. So YouTube is an amazing thing that just randos like us can have these really important conversations. So I appreciate the work that you've done. I have found what you've talked about to be thought-provoking, and I'm glad you were willing to come on and talk to us, and hope we can do it again. So
yeah, I'd love to come back on. I'd love to have you guys on my show too, if you guys ever want to come on.
Yeah, you bet.
We should definitely do that. So
sweet. Okay, let's set that up. I'll give you guys a break for me for a few weeks, but then we'll have you on a little bit after that.
Sounds good.
Sounds good.
If we haven't, maybe we've been chased from the church by episode 200 and we'll have to house us in your basement. So
well, hey, you guys will never be chased out of the church of Kevin Nontradical. So you'll always be welcome on my channel.
Appreciate it. Well, thank you, Kevin. We'll link to your show and stuff below, but appreciate you coming on. Thank you, Jonah.
Yep,
and,
thank you.
Thanks everyone for listening. And until next time, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Have a good
Bye.
one.